The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and living metal. Light from a dozen different suns filtered through the dome above, casting rainbow shadows on the gathered representatives of 847 species. They had come from every corner of the galaxy, from worlds of ice and worlds of fire, from gas giants and rocky moons, from places where life should not exist but somehow did. For 12,000 years, the Council had kept peace among the stars. Wars still happened, of course. Species still disagreed. But the great conflicts that had once burned across entire sectors were now just memories, recorded in the archives and studied by scholars who could barely imagine such violence. In the far corner of the chamber, in seats that were slightly too small and positioned where the light was, sat the human delegation. They had been members of the Council for only 60 years. In galactic terms, they had arrived yesterday. Ambassador Sarah watched the proceedings with patient eyes. She was used to being ignored. Humanity was young, after all. Their technology was borrowed. Their fleet was small. Their empire, if it could even be called that, consisted of just 17 colony worlds clustered around an unremarkable yellow star. The elder races looked at humans the way adults looked at children playing at being grown up. It was amusing. It was harmless. It was not worth taking seriously. What the elder races did not understand, what they could not understand because they had never experienced it, was what had made humanity what it was. Terra was a death world. The Galactic Council had a classification system for planets. Class 1 worlds were paradises, gentle places where life evolved slowly and peacefully. Class 5 worlds were hell, places so hostile that nothing could survive on them without constant technological support. Terra was a Class 4, high gravity that crushed the bones of visitors from lighter worlds, an atmosphere full of oxygen, that most dangerous of gases, ready to burn anything it touched, weather systems that could destroy cities, predators that had evolved over millions of years to become perfect killing machines, diseases that mutated faster than medicine could adapt, and worst of all, the humans themselves, who had spent their entire existence fighting each other for resources, territory, and ideas. The elder races saw this as a weakness. How could a species that had nearly destroyed itself a dozen times ever become a serious power? How could beings from such a brutal world ever learn the sophisticated arts of diplomacy and trade? They did not understand that the brutality was the point. Every human alive was descended from survivors. Their ancestors had outlasted ice ages and plagues, wars and famines, extinction events that had killed 90% of all life on their world. The humans who reached the stars were not soft creatures from gentle worlds. They were the children of the apocalypse, again and again and again. But the Dominion did not know this. They saw only the numbers. High Overlord Hal stood in the command center of his flagship, the dreadnought Inevitable Supremacy. He was tall for a nearly 3 meters of armored chitin and razor-sharp limbs. His compound eyes reflected the holographic display before him, showing the positions of his fleet. 40,000 warships, the largest armada assembled in 5 centuries. 300 years of building, planning, and preparing had led to this moment. "Show me the human territories," he commanded. The display shifted. 17 small dots appeared, clustered together like a frightened herd of prey animals. At their center was a slightly larger dot marked with the symbol for a Terra. "Their fleet strength?" Hal asked. "Approximately 2,000 vessels, High Overlord," his tactical officer reported. "Mostly light cruisers and frigates. They have only 12 capital ships." "Defensive installations?" "Minimal. There has orbital platforms, but nothing that could withstand a sustained assault. Their colonies are even less protected." Hal's mandibles clicked together in the expression of satisfaction. This was going to be easier than he had hoped. "And the Council, what will they do when we attack?" His diplomatic advisor stepped forward. She was smaller than Hal, her carapace marked with the patterns of her caste. They will condemn us, High Overlord. They will pass resolutions. They will impose economic sanctions, but they will not fight. They have not fought a real war in 3,000 years. They have forgotten how. The humans have allies. None of significance. The elder races consider them too young to matter. They have trade agreements, nothing more. No mutual defense treaties. No military alliances. Hal studied the display for a long moment. The Dominion had spent 3 centuries in the shadows, building their strength while the rest of the galaxy grew soft and complacent. They had watched and waited and planned. And now the time had come. The humans controlled 17 resource-rich systems. Their worlds were full of metals and minerals that the Dominion needed. Their population was large enough to provide workers for the factories and mines, and their location was strategically perfect, sitting right in the path of future expansion. More importantly, they were weak. Everyone knew it. The Council knew it. The humans themselves probably knew it. Taking their territory would be quick and clean, a demonstration of power that would make the other species think twice before opposing them. "We strike at Terra first," Hal announced. "Cut off the head and the body will die. Their colonies will surrender within days." His war council murmured agreement. The logic was sound. The mathematics were clear. 2,000 ships could not stop 40,000. It was simply impossible. "What about the humans themselves?" one of his generals asked. "Will they fight?" Hal made a dismissive gesture. "They will try, they always try, but they are soft creatures born on a world that somehow failed to kill them. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. They cannot even see in the dark without technological assistance. When they realize they cannot win, they will surrender. All species do." He turned to face his council, his compound eyes glittering with ambition. "In 1 month, human space will belong to the Dominion. In 2 months, the Council will have accepted our expansion as a fact they cannot change. In a year, we will begin planning our next conquest." He raised one armored limb in salute. "For the glory of the—" "For the glory of the—" his council echoed. The orders went out. The fleet began to move. 40,000 warships turned toward a small cluster of stars where a young species had made their home, unaware that they had been marked for conquest. And in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, the human delegation continued to watch and wait, not yet knowing that the storm was coming. But when they found out, the galaxy would learn something it had forgotten. Humans did not surrender. Humans did not give up. Humans did not go quietly into the night. They fought. They always fought. And they would fight until there was nothing left to fight with, and then they would find something else. They did not know this yet, but they would learn. They would all learn. Admiral Way was dreaming of her grandmother's garden when the alarm pulled her from sleep. The sound cut through her quarters like a knife, sharp and urgent, the kind of alarm that meant something had gone very wrong. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, pulling on her uniform as she moved toward the door. 30 years in the Terran Navy had trained her body to respond before her mind caught up. By the time she reached the bridge of the TSS Resilience, she was fully alert and ready for whatever waited. What waited was worse than anything she had imagined. "Report," she commanded, taking her position in the command chair. Lieutenant Commander turned from his console, his face pale. "Admiral, the Deep Space Sensor Net detected a massive FTL emergence at grid reference 774. We are still processing the data, but initial estimates suggest—" He stopped, swallowed, and tried again. "Initial estimates suggest 38,000 vessels, Admiral. Signatures. They are not responding to hails. Their weapons are active. Their heading is—" He paused again. "Their heading is directly toward Sol." The bridge fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing and turned to look at their admiral, felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their fear and their hope. They were waiting for her to tell them what to do, to make sense of something that made no sense at all. 38,000 ships. The entire Terran Navy numbered 2,000. Even if every vessel in human space gathered together, they would be outnumbered nearly 20 to 1. Closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought of her grandmother's garden again, the smell of jasmine and fresh earth, the sound of birds singing in the morning. She thought of Terra, the world she had sworn to protect. She thought of the 8 billion people living there, going about their lives, unaware that death was coming for them. Then she opened her eyes. Time to Sol at their current speed. Approximately 6 days, Admiral. 6 days, not enough time to build more ships, not enough time to evacuate, not enough time to do anything except fight with what they had. Send an alert to Terran Command, ordered. Priority Alpha. All vessels are to converge on Sol immediately. Activate the Terran Defense Network. All orbital platforms to combat readiness, and send a message to the fleet. His fingers flew over his console. What message, Admiral? Stood up from her chair. Around her, her bridge crew straightened, drawing strength from her calm. She was not afraid. She had accepted long ago that death might come for her in the dark between stars. What mattered was not whether she lived, but what she did with the time she had left. Tell them this. You have entered Terran space with hostile intent. You will withdraw immediately or you will be destroyed. There will be no further warnings. Admiral said quietly, they have 38,000 ships. I know how many ships they have, Lieutenant Commander. Send the message. The message went out. Across human space, other messages followed. The emergency broadcast system activated on every colony world, on every station, on every vessel. The words were simple and direct, the way humans preferred when things were serious. They are coming, stand ready. On Terra, President received the news in the middle of a cabinet meeting. He listened to the briefing without interrupting, his face as still as stone. When the military advisor finished speaking, was silent for a long moment. Options, he finally asked. We cannot win a direct engagement, General replied. The numbers are too overwhelming. We could try to negotiate, offer them whatever they want in exchange for peace. What do they want? Based on their approach vector and previous intelligence, we believe they want Terra itself. Our worlds, our people, everything. Nodded slowly. He was an old man, born in a time when humanity had still been recovering from its last great war. He had spent his entire life working for peace, building bridges between nations and peoples, trying to create a future where his would never know the horror of conflict. But he was also Japanese. His ancestors had fought against impossible odds before. They had stood against empires and typhoons and earthquakes. They had been knocked down and gotten back up, again and again, through 2,000 years of history. There will be no negotiation, said. If we surrender, we die slowly as slaves. If we fight, we might die quickly as free people. But there is also a third possibility. He looked around the table at his advisors. We might win. Sir, with respect, the mathematics. The mathematics said we could never reach the stars, interrupted. The mathematics said we would destroy ourselves before we left our own world. The mathematics have been wrong about humanity before. He stood up. Activate the contingency protocols, all of them. The room went very quiet. The contingency protocols were supposed to be theoretical. They were plans drawn up in secret, weapons developed in hidden facilities, strategies created for scenarios that everyone hoped would never happen. They violated Galactic Council treaties. They violated basic decency. They were the darkest expression of humanity's endless creativity in the art of destruction. But they existed, because humans had learned over thousands of years of painful history that hopping for peace was not the same as preparing for war. Across 17 colony worlds, things began to happen. Reserve fleets that had been mothballed for decades powered up their engines. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to military production. Bunkers that had been sealed since the last Great War opened their doors. And on Terra itself, something even more significant occurred. The old divisions between nations, the ancient conflicts that had never quite healed, simply stopped mattering. When faced with an enemy from beyond the stars, humans did what they had always done when truly threatened. They came together. Volunteers flooded military recruitment centers. Scientists dropped their research and reported to weapons laboratories. Engineers, doctors, teachers, farmers, every person with useful skills offered them freely to the common defense. Within 48 hours, humanity had transformed from a peaceful civilization into a war machine. Admiral received the news of the mobilization with grim satisfaction. It would not be enough, she knew that. The numbers were still impossible, but it would be something, and something was better than nothing. Her fleet formed up around her flagship, every vessel that could reach the rally point in time. 1,200 ships, including the Resilience. They would be the first line of defense, the outer wall that they would have to break through. Admiral said, "We have received a response from the fleet." "Let me hear it." The voice that filled the bridge was translated from the clicking of mandibles, but the arrogance came through clearly. "Human vessel, your threats are amusing. We are 40,000 strong. You are nothing. Surrender your worlds peacefully and your people will be treated as valued resources. Resist and you will be exterminated. You have one cycle to decide." Listen to the message with a face that showed nothing. When it ended, she turned to her communications officer. "Send a reply, one word only." "What word, Admiral?" Smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for a moment like this, who had trained and sacrificed and waited for the day when everything she had learned would finally matter. No. The battle for humanity had begun. The first engagement happened at the Helios line, 3 light years from Sol. Admiral had chosen her ground carefully. The region was filled with asteroid fields and debris clouds, natural cover that would break up the enemy formation and reduce the advantage of their numbers. They came in a standard assault pattern, their ships arranged in neat rows like soldiers on parade. They had fought this way for centuries. Their tactics were proven. Their commanders were experienced. They expected the humans to form up in response, to meet them ship to ship in a battle of attrition that could only end one way. The humans did not do this. All ships broadcast, "Execute pattern fury. Remember your training, remember what you are fighting for. Good hunting." The Terran fleet scattered like seeds in the wind. Ships that had been flying in formation suddenly went in 12 different directions, their engines burning at maximum power. To the sensors, it looked like chaos. It looked like panic. It was neither. The first dreadnought died without understanding what had killed it. A small human frigate, the TSS Defiant, had been accelerating toward it at full speed. The point defense systems targeted the frigate, poured fire into it, stripped away its shields and hull plating, but the ship kept coming. At the last moment, the crew of the Defiant ejected in escape pods. The ship itself, now little more than a flying missile, struck the dreadnought at a significant fraction of light speed. The explosion was visible across the entire battlefield. 300 human sailors had just traded their ship for a vessel 50 times its size. The commanders did not understand. This was not how wars were fought. Ships were expensive. Crews were valuable. No rational species threw them away like this. But humans were not fighting rationally. They were fighting with something far more dangerous. They were fighting with desperation. The second wave of attacks came from a different direction. Carrier groups launched fighter swarms, hundreds of small craft piloted by men and women who knew they were unlikely to survive. The fighters did not try to dogfight with interceptors. Instead, they flew directly into the formation, targeting engines and weapons systems, dying in fire as they crippled vessel after vessel. And then came the weapons. The Galactic Council had strict rules about warfare. No weapons of mass destruction, no antimatter warheads, no gravity bombs, no anything that could destroy a planet or kill billions. These rules had kept the peace for every civilized species followed them. Humanity had signed those treaties. They had agreed to those rules. They had built a military that theoretically with galactic standards. They had also built other things, in secret facilities hidden on moons and asteroids, things that no inspector had ever found, things that humanity had hoped it would never have to use. They called them the Hell Weapons. 3 capital ships simply ceased to exist when antimatter warheads detonated against their hulls. A squadron of cruisers was consumed by a gravity implosion device that crushed them into a sphere of metal smaller than a human fist. A dreadnought's crew went mad when a weapon designed to disrupt neural activity flooded their ship with invisible radiation. High Overlord Hal watched the battle from his command center with growing disbelief. His fleet was still advancing, still destroying human ships at a ratio of 10 to 1. The mathematics still favored him, but something was wrong. His crews were afraid. They had not known fear in combat for centuries. They were the predators of their, evolved to hunt and kill without hesitation. Fear was for prey species, for soft creatures that hid in the dark and hoped the hunters would pass them by. But now his officers flinched when human ships approached. His soldiers hesitated before engaging. His entire fleet was infected with an emotion they had never been taught to handle. High Overlord, his tactical officer reported, voice unsteady, "We have lost 4,000 vessels." 4,000, in less than a day, against an enemy that should have been swept aside in hours. "Continue the advance," Hal ordered. "We still outnumber them 17 to 1. This changes nothing." But even as he spoke, he knew it was not true. The humans were fighting in ways they had never seen, using tactics that no civilized species would consider. They were sacrificing themselves without hesitation, throwing away ships and lives as if they cost nothing. And they were boarding. Hal received the reports with horror. Human soldiers, wearing nothing but powered armor, were launching themselves across the void between ships. They were landing on hulls, cutting their way inside, fighting through corridors designed for beings twice their size. They were dying by the hundreds, but they kept coming, and every ship they boarded became a. There were excellent warriors in open combat, but in the tight spaces of a ship's interior, against an enemy that refused to stop no matter how many times they were shot, their advantage disappeared. The humans fought like animals, with knives and fists when their weapons ran empty, with their teeth and nails when even those were gone. One captain reported, just before his ship fell silent, that the humans were laughing as they died. Laughing. The Battle of the Helios Line lasted 3 days. When it ended, they had lost 8,000 ships. The humans had lost 900. The mathematics still favored the invaders, but something fundamental had shifted. Admiral, wounded but alive, transmitted a message to the remaining human vessels. "Fall back to the secondary line. They are hurt. They are scared. Now we make them bleed again." Behind her, the industrial capacity of 17 worlds was building new ships. Veterans who had thought their fighting days were over were putting on uniforms. Children were being evacuated to bunkers while their parents took up arms. And on Terra, 8 billion people watched the battle reports and felt something ancient stirring in their blood. They were afraid, yes. Only fools were not afraid of death. But they were also angry, and beneath the anger was something harder and colder and more powerful. They were determined. They had attacked their home. They had tried to take everything they had built, everything they loved, everything they were. The thought they could crush humanity with superior numbers and then move on to their next conquest. They were wrong. High Overlord Hal gave the order to continue the advance. His fleet reformed around his flagship, licking its wounds but still overwhelming in size. The humans had surprised him, had hurt him worse than he had expected, But he still had 30,000 ships. He still had the numbers. He would reach Terra. He would burn it. And then he would move on, and the galaxy would learn that the Dominion could not be stopped. That was what he believed. He was about to discover how wrong he was. Because the humans were not alone anymore. Across the galaxy, other species were watching the battle. They were seeing something they had not seen a young species standing against impossible odds, fighting not for conquest or glory but simply for the right to exist. And some of them were starting to remember what they had forgotten. Some of them were starting to feel ashamed. The Council was about to wake up. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called with a speed that had not been seen in 3,000 years. Representatives arrived from every corner of known space, summoned by messages marked with the highest priority codes. Some traveled for days to reach the Great Chamber. Others used ancient gateway systems that had been dormant for centuries. All of them came because they understood that something unprecedented was happening. The tactical feeds from human space played on massive displays floating above the chamber floor. The assembled representatives watched in silence as human ships threw themselves against the armada. They watched crews sacrifice themselves to destroy vessels 50 times their size. They watched soldiers board enemy ships and fight hand to hand in the corridors. They watched and they remembered. Long ago, before the Council had brought peace to the galaxy, there had been wars, terrible wars, conflicts that had burned across entire sectors and left worlds dead and empty. The elder races had fought each other with weapons that modern species could barely imagine, had killed billions in disputes that no one now remembered. The Council had been created to end that horror, and it had succeeded. For 12,000 years, the great powers had kept their weapons sheathed. Disputes were settled with words, not fire. The memory of war faded until it became history, and history became myth, and myth became something that had happened to other people in other times. But now the myth was playing out before their eyes, and the elder races did not know how to feel. Ambassador Ani of the Consortium spoke first. His species was ancient, one of the founding members of the Council. They had not fought a war in 8,000 years. This is a clear violation of Council principles. The initiated unprovoked aggression against a member species. We must issue immediate and strong condemnation. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Condemnation. Yes, that was what the Council did. They condemned things, they expressed concern, they passed resolutions. Ambassador Sarah listened to the murmurs and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had been recalled from Terra to speak for humanity at this session. Her ship had barely made it through the blockade. She had watched 3 escort vessels die to protect her, their crews burning so that she could deliver a message that might not matter at all. With respect, she said, rising to her feet, condemnation is insufficient. The chamber fell silent. The human delegation rarely spoke at council sessions. They were too new, too weak, too insignificant. Their opinions were tolerated but not valued. Walked to the center of the chamber. She was small by galactic standards, barely reaching the chest of most representatives. Her uniform was stained with smoke and blood from the battle to reach this place. She looked exhausted, wounded, and absolutely unbroken. "The believed we were weak," she said. "They saw our small fleet, our young civilization, our borrowed technology, and they decided we were prey. They believed they could take our and face no consequences because the council would do nothing but talk." She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. Some would not meet her eyes. Others stared back with expressions she could not read. "They were wrong about us," continued. "We have fought them for 11 days now. We have lost half our fleet. We have lost millions of our people, but we are still fighting and we will continue to fight until there is nothing left of us to fight with." Her voice hardened. "The question is not what humanity will do. We have already decided. The question is what the rest of you will do." "Ambassador," Ani said carefully, The Council has protocols for situations like this. We will impose economic sanctions. We will isolate the diplomatically. Over time, these pressures will force them to withdraw. Over time, laughed, and there was no humor in it. Ambassador, in 3 days the fleet will reach Terra. In 4 days they will begin bombarding our planet. In 5 days, 8 billion people will be dead or enslaved. We do not have time. What would you have us do? Another representative asked. Go to war. The Council has not fought a war in 3,000 years. We do not have the military capacity. You have the largest combined fleet in the galaxy, interrupted. Every major species maintains warships, even if you pretend they are only for defense. Together, you could crush thee in a week. And restart the cycle of galactic war. Return to the Dark Ages when species exterminated each other over territory and resources. Ani shook his head. The cost would be too high. The cost of doing nothing is higher, pointed at the tactical display, where human ships continued to die in fire. They are not going to stop with us. They have spent 3 centuries building that fleet. Do you think they did it just to conquer 17 worlds? They will come for all of you, one by one, and each time they will be stronger, and each time the Council will debate and condemn and do nothing. The chamber was silent. On the display, a human carrier exploded as 3 dreadnoughts focused their fire on it. The escape pods launched, tiny dots of life against the darkness, and the representatives watched as most of them were destroyed by point defense fire. The senior representative of the hegemony rose slowly to his feet. They were among the oldest species in the galaxy. They had been part of the Council since its founding. Their voice carried weight that few others could match. I remember the wars, he said quietly. I am old enough to have seen the end of them. I remember what we swore when we created this Council. We swore that we would never again allow the strong to prey upon the weak. We swore that we would stand together against aggression, that an attack on one would be an attack on all. He looked at with eyes that had seen pass. We have forgotten that oath. We have grown comfortable in our peace, so comfortable that we forgot what it cost. The humans are reminding us. What are you suggesting? Ani asked. I am suggesting that we honor our promises. The representative turned to face the chamber. The hegemony pledges its 3rd fleet to the defense of Terra. We will fight beside the humans, or we will watch them die and know that we are cowards. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted at each other, some in support, others in horror. This was unprecedented. This was dangerous. This was exactly what the Council had been created to prevent. But slowly other voices joined The consortium pledged half of its naval reserve. The alliance committed its entire battle group. The collective, the federation, the thrice-blessed communion, one by one, species that had not fought announced that they would stand with humanity. Not all of them, not even most. Many species remained silent, unwilling to risk their own safety for a race they barely knew, but enough voices rose, enough fleets were promised. Stood in the center of the chaos, tears streaming down her face. She had come expecting nothing. She had prepared to beg for scraps of support that would not arrive in time. Instead, she had witnessed something she had never thought possible. The galaxy was waking up. As the session continued, she sent a message back to Admiral, still fighting her desperate delaying action against the advance. Help is coming, hold the line, we are not alone. Across the stars, fleets that had been silent for centuries powered up their engines. Warriors who had trained their entire lives for battles that never came checked their weapons and prepared for war. Ancient ships, maintained out of tradition rather than necessity, received crews for the first time in generations. They had wanted to conquer a young, weak species with no allies. They had instead united the galaxy against them. And they had no idea what was coming. The Armada arrived at Sol on the 18th day of the war. High Overlord Hal stood on the bridge of the inevitable supremacy and looked at the world that had caused him so much trouble. Terra hung in the void before him, blue and green and swirled with white clouds. It was a beautiful world, he admitted to himself. It was a pity it would have to burn. His fleet had been reduced to 28,000 ships. The humans had fought them at every step, bleeding them with ambushes and suicide attacks and weapons that no civilized species should possess. But it did not matter. The defenders had been ground down to less than 1,000 vessels. The mathematics were still in his favor. Terra would fall. All ships, he commanded, prepare for final assault. Target the orbital platforms first, then begin planetary bombardment. I want this world subjugated within 3 cycles. His tactical officer hesitated. High Overlord, we are detecting additional FTL signatures at the edge of the system. Hal frowned. More human reinforcements. They cannot have anything significant left. These signatures are not human, High Overlord. The display updated, and Hal felt something he had not experienced since childhood. He felt his confidence shatter. Ships were emerging from FTL all around the system. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Ships bearing the markings of the hegemony, the consortium, the alliance. Ships from species that had not fought a war in. Ships that were converging on Sol from every direction, forming up with the human survivors into a wall of metal and fire that stretched across the stars. This is impossible, Hal whispered. The Council never acts, they only talk. High Overlord, we are receiving a transmission from the Allied fleet. Let me hear it. The voice that filled the bridge was human. Admiral Wei, still alive against all odds, still fighting after 18 days of constant battle. She sounded exhausted, but beneath the exhaustion was something harder than steel. Fleet, you have attacked a member species of the Galactic Council. You have killed millions of innocent people. You have violated every treaty and every principle that civilized species hold sacred. And now you have come to our home. Her voice grew colder. You should have stayed away. You should have accepted our surrender when we offered none. Because now the galaxy has remembered what it forgot. We are not alone. We were never alone. And you are about to learn what happens when you threaten the people we love. The transmission ended. Hal stared at the display, counting the Allied ships. The numbers were almost equal now. 28,000 against 24,000 Allied vessels. Still an advantage, but nothing like the overwhelming force he had expected. He had 2 choices. He could retreat, pull back his fleet, and try again another day. Or he could attack, trusting that his experienced crews could defeat an alliance that had never fought together, that had no shared tactics, that was made up of species who had been at peace for longer than humanity had existed. Hal chose to attack. He had come too far to turn back. He had lost too many ships, too many soldiers, too much prestige. Victory or death. There was no third option. All ships, he ordered, engage the enemy, for the glory of the... The Battle of Sol was the largest naval engagement in 3,000 years. 28,000 warships clashed with 24,000 Allied vessels in a sphere of fire that surrounded Terra like a burning shell. The light of the battle was visible from the planet's surface, a second sun that turned night into day. They fought with desperation. They knew that defeat meant more than death. It meant the end of their dominion, the destruction of everything they had built over 3 centuries. They threw themselves at the Allied lines with suicidal fury, trying to break through to Terra, trying to accomplish something that would justify the losses they had already suffered. But the Allies held. The human ships fought at the center of the formation, their crews knowing that this was the last stand. If they fell here, there would be no more retreats. Behind them was Terra, the world they had crossed the stars to protect, the home of everyone they loved. They did not need to be told to fight harder. They already knew. Around them, the elder races fought with weapons they had almost forgotten how to use. The dreadnoughts were ancient, their designs unchanged in 8,000 years, but their crews were fresh, and their weapons were deadly. The consortium cruisers moved with the precision of machines. their targeting computers identifying weaknesses in formations that human eyes would have missed. The Alliance warriors, giant beings who had evolved on a world even harsher than Terra, led boarding actions that made the boarding parties look like children playing at war. And slowly, impossibly, they began to lose. Hal watched his fleet die around him. Ship after ship vanished from his display, destroyed or crippled or boarded. His officers reported losses that grew worse with every hour. His reserves were gone. His ammunition was running low. His crews were exhausted from weeks of constant combat. "High Overlord," his tactical officer said, "we should retreat. We can rebuild, try again." "There will be no retreat," Hal interrupted. "We retreat now and the Dominion is finished. Every species we have threatened will see that we can be defeated. They will unite against us just as they have united here. Our only hope is victory." He turned to face his bridge crew. They were afraid. He could see it in their postures. They had never expected to die here, in a system ruled by a species they had dismissed as prey. "We will target Terra directly," Hal announced. "Break through the defensive line and begin planetary bombardment. If we cannot have this world, no one will." The inevitable supremacy accelerated toward Terra, surrounded by the remnants of the fleet. They abandoned formation, abandoned tactics, abandoned everything except the desperate drive to reach the planet and burn it. If they were going to die, they would take 8 billion humans with them. Admiral saw the enemy charge and understood what Hal intended. She also understood that she could not stop him. The Allied fleet was too spread out, too engaged with other enemies, too far away to intercept. But the orbital platforms were not. "Luna Defense Command," she broadcast. "This is Admiral. The enemy is making a direct run at Terra. Everything you have now." The moon had been transformed over the 18 days of the war. What had been a small colony with minimal defenses was now a fortress, bristling with weapons that humanity had built in secret and deployed in desperation. When the fleet approached, the moon opened fire. The barrage was unlike anything they had ever seen. Antimatter warheads, kinetic projectiles, energy beams that cut through shields like paper. Ships died by the hundreds, their hulls torn apart by weapons that should not have existed, weapons that humanity had hoped it would never need. The inevitable supremacy pushed through the fire. Hal watched his escorts die around him, watched the planet grow larger in his display, watched his dream of conquest come within reach of his claws. Then the first boarding pod struck his hull. Humans in powered armor cut through the outer plating and flooded into his ship. They fought through the corridors with weapons blazing, pushing toward the bridge. His guards fell before them. His officers died at their stations. When the bridge doors exploded inward, Hal rose to meet them. He was a warrior. He would not die cowering. The human who killed him was a small woman with tired eyes and a blade that glowed with captured starlight. She did not hesitate. She did not gloat. She simply struck, and the High Overlord of the Dominion fell. The Battle of Saul lasted 19 hours. When it ended, the fleet was gone. Not retreated, not surrendered. Gone. 28,000 ships reduced to debris fields that would drift through the system for centuries. The Allies had lost 11,000 vessels. Millions were dead. The cost had been terrible. But Terra still turned beneath its sun. 8 billion people still lived on its surface. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Council had fought together against a common enemy. In the aftermath, Ambassador addressed the Council one final time. "We did not ask for this war," she said. "We would have lived in peace with everyone if they had let us, but they did not. They came for our home and we fought back. We would do it again. We will always do it again." She looked around the chamber at representatives, who now saw humanity in a different light. "We are a young species. We have much to learn, but we know some things that the elder races have forgotten. We know that peace is precious, but that it must be defended. We know that some things are worth dying for, and we know that together we are stronger than anyone who would try to break us apart. The Council amended its charter that day. Humanity was granted a permanent seat on the Security Directorate. The Dominion was dissolved, its surviving worlds placed under joint administration. And across the galaxy, species who had thought humans insignificant began to reconsider. The death world called Terra had produced something remarkable, a species that had learned to survive the unsurvivable, to fight the unbeatable, to hope when hope was gone. They were young, they were small, they were fragile by galactic standards, and they were absolutely unbreakable. The galaxy would never make the mistake of underestimating them again. On Terra, in the ruins of cities that had been touched by orbital fire, humans began to rebuild. They mourned their dead. They honored their heroes. They looked up at the stars and knew that they had earned their place among them. And in a small garden in Japan, an old woman planted new flowers where the bombs had fallen, and smiled at the sunlight, and remembered that life always found a way to continue. It always had. It always would. That was what it meant to be human.